Cadets put a gun to the old veteran's head behind the gym on a hot afternoon at the military academy, and the old man did not flinch, did not blink, did not even step back. He only looked at the blue plastic training pistol, then at the cocky boy holding it, and said in a calm, steady voice, "Fingers straight, muzzle down," which made the boy laugh, because he wanted fear and not advice, and the four other cadets laughed too, because they were young and loud and sure the world would bend for them, and they all wore the same white shirts and the same bright smiles they used for photos, and they had decided the quiet janitor who swept the hall and picked up their trash would learn his place today. The old man stood there in his faded cap and carried bucket and said nothing more. And the boy pressed the plastic barrel to the old man's forehead and hissed, "You will respect me, old man." And the veteran simply breathed in and said, "Respect is not forced, son. It's earned." And for a long second nobody moved, until the range whistle blew from the field and a coach yelled for everyone to form up. So the boys shoved the janitor's shoulder as they went, and the plastic pistol clattered into the bucket on purpose, and one of them said, "Keep it as a gift." And they left him there with the echo of their laughter. The old man picked up the toy and turned it in his hands, checked the seams, the orange sight in the worn spot where a thumb had rubbed the slide over and over like a habit. Then he put it in his pocket and walked slowly toward the range, sweeping trash as he went, because that was his job, because he liked the work, because it kept him close to a place he had loved when he was young and steady and his hands had not yet learned to shake. On the firing line, the heat trembled over the sand berm, and the cadets in blue belts showed off for a group of visitors, parents and donors, and a tall colonel who stood with arms folded, and the coach barked, "Safety first, muzzles down, mags out, eyes on." And most of the boys did as told, but the same five walked like they owned the ground. One kept his finger inside the guard, one laughed with his muzzle sweeping ankles, and the boy who had held the plastic gun raised a live pistol and winked at the crowd as if a camera were on him. And the coach did not see because he was helping a younger boy with ear protection that hurt. And a girl on the end of the line watched with tight lips and said nothing, because she had already reported them once and had been called a teacher's pet and crybaby, so she did not want more trouble. The old man stood behind the trash can near the water cooler and watched too, and he saw the way the boys pointed, the way the safety rules slid like gravel under a boot, and he felt a tight knot pull inside his chest like the start of a storm he knew by smell alone. The drill began, the whistle blew, targets flipped, shots cracked across the line, brass jumped, the smell of powder filled the air, and the boy who had held the plastic gun started to perform, firing fast, laughing, hip shooting between commands, and the muzzle jerked sideways toward the girl's lane, not once, but twice. And the old man's voice cut across the noise like a rope thrown in a flood, "Cease fire!" But the whistle did not sound because the coach still could not hear over the plugs in the crowd. So the old man stepped forward and put his bare hand over the top of the boy's slide as he fired again, locking it, burning his palm, and he turned the muzzle to the ground and said, low and firm, "Now." And the boy froze, and the line finally went silent, and the coach looked up, shocked, and the colonel's head snapped toward the disturbance. The old man held the gun until the chamber was cleared and the magazine dropped, and he set it on the bench and showed his burned palm without a word. And some parents gasped, and the coach started to scold the boy, but the boy leaped to his pride like a cliff ledge and shouted, "He grabbed me, sir. He interfered with my drill. He's just a janitor." And the five friends stood with him like fence posts in a row. And the coach, flustered, said, "We'll sort it after the break," and told everyone to hydrate. The old man moved to the shade, filled paper cups, and passed them down the line, even to the five who glared, because thirst is thirst, and manners are not a bargain. And as he handed a cup to the girl on the end, she whispered, "Thank you." And he noticed her stance, her careful finger, the way her eyes scanned the line before she ever looked at her own target, and he nodded once, as if to say, "Keep that." The colonel walked over then, slow and measuring, and looked at the burned hand and the quiet eyes and said, "You know the regs." And the old man said, "Yes, sir." And the colonel studied his face another second, something like a memory rising but not catching, and then he turned away because donors were waiting and there was a schedule, and schedules often feel larger than truth until truth knocks them down.
The second drill was a moving one, steel at 30 yards, fire 2, move 2, and clouds stacked over the hills like big gray ships, and the wind shifted to push sound back into the crowd. The instructor warned, "No cowboy stuff." But the 5 smirked, and when the whistle blew, the boy with the big smile sprinted ahead of his lane.
Cutting in front of the girl, and she stumbled on a spent casing, and her pistol dipped, and he spun, grinning, bringing his muzzle up right across her chest because he wanted to beat her, to show her, to win. And that is when the old man moved without thinking, the way a hand pulls back from flame before a mind tells it to, stepping between muzzles, shoulder-checking the boy from the side, taking the hit meant for the girl as the pistol barked, the round punching the old man's sleeve in the hot air against his ribs like a slap from a giant. Screams, whistles, hands, and then silence crashed down, and the boy stood shocked, mouth open, while the old man leaned on his knees and breathed. And when he straightened, the sleeve was torn, but no blood ran because the round had carved cloth and missed meat by an inch. And the girl's hand shook, but her eyes were fierce, and she said, loud enough for all, "He saved me," and her voice did not tremble. The colonel stormed in then, face hard as a wall, and the coach stammered apologies, and the donors stared with thin mouths, and the 5 boys blustered about accidents and overreactions, and how the old man had no right to touch a weapon. And the colonel said, "Who trained you?" And the boys went quiet, because the answer was supposed to be him. And the colonel turned to the janitor and said, half a question, "You shouldn't even know how to—" And the old man reached into his pocket and set the blue plastic pistol on the bench, laying it carefully next to the live one. And he said, "I know the difference between play and death." And his voice was so flat and tired that it scraped something raw in the air. They moved to the classroom for a review, the sky rumbling above like a cart over stones, and the old man stood at the back while the coach replayed safety rules on the big screen, and the 5 boys slouched and whispered, and the girl sat straight and took notes, and the colonel paced like a caged thing because he was caught between discipline and a public show, and the donors checked their phones, and then the fire alarm blared because lightning hit a transformer, and the old wooden storage shed behind the backstop began to smoke. Someone yelled that there were crates inside, and the word "AMA" rippled through the crowd like a cold wind, and cadets bolted toward the door to look, and the coach shouted to stop. But panic eats commands like sugar, so bodies surged outside, and the smoke thickened. And then a small, sharp crack popped from the shed where the heat began to cook off rounds. Everyone stumbled back, and the colonel called the base fire crew, but they were minutes out, and the wind pushed the smoke toward the range where a small boy, a donor's kid, suddenly broke from his mother and ran because he thought his dog had been left by the fence and he wanted to be brave. And the mother screamed, and no one moved fast enough because the shed snapped and spat sparks, and fear glued feet to dirt. And the old man put down his mop and walked straight through the smoke, jacket over his mouth, into the shed, and the world held its breath. Inside, the heat bit, and the air burned, and the old man's eyes watered, but he had learned long ago how to walk through places where the air did not want you, and he found the boy coughing by a stack of crates, and he lifted him under one arm. Then he saw the real problem on the far shelf. Not just ammo, but a bright orange box labeled in stenciled letters. A flare kit cracked open, one flare already hissing red against a pile of oily rags. He kicked the rags clear, grabbed the flare with a rag-wrapped hand, and jammed it into the wet sand bucket, starved it, smothered it, ended it, then turned and carried the boy outside into the wind and the light. The mother fell on her knees and held her child and sobbed, and the colonel stared at the old man like a curtain had been pulled from a window, and he said in a hoarse voice, "How did you know what to do?" And the old man only shook his head and coughed. Sirens wailed, and the fire crew doused the shed, and the smoke thinned, and the donors whispered about lawsuits and safety reviews, and the 5 boys stood pale now, their jokes shallow and gone. And the colonel walked to the center of the range, removed his cap and addressed everyone, but before he could speak, a black van rolled up, and 2 people stepped out in plain clothes with short hair and quiet eyes, and the colonel snapped to attention out of habit. The woman showed a badge and said, "We're here for the inspection." And the word dropped like a stone in a pool, because inspection meant secret test, meant the academy was being watched, meant the day was not what it seemed.
The woman's eyes moved past the colonel to the old man, and something like relief crossed her face. And she said, "Good to see you again, Chief?" And the crowd turned as one because the word hit hard. Chief. The old man straightened slowly and nodded to her, and finally looked like he fit inside his own skin. And the woman said to the colonel, "You didn't know?" And the colonel shook his head once, because pride sometimes blinds even careful men. And she said, "This is Chief Warrant Nathan Cole, retired, former master range instructor and program founder. He built this safety course 25 years ago and trained half the instructors who trained you." And the air changed. The 5 boys went from shocked to ashamed in a heartbeat, their faces draining as if the ground had opened under them, and the donor's whispers turned to low, guilty sounds, and the girl on the end of the line smiled without showing teeth because the world had just turned right side up. The inspector continued. He agreed to return in plain clothes to see the culture with his own eyes, and she turned to the old man and added, "We saw enough." And her gaze slid toward the 5 boys like a shadow moving over water. The colonel cleared his throat and said, "Chief Cole, I—" And the old man raised his hand, burned palm forward, not to stop him, but to steady the moment. And he said, "This place makes good people better, or it used to. It can again." And then he faced the 5 boys and said, "What you did with that plastic toy was not a joke. It was a warning about your hearts. The weapon only shows what's inside." And the boy who had put the toy to his head swallowed hard and whispered, "I'm sorry." And for once he meant it. The old man nodded and said, "You will show it." Then pointed to the girl and said, "You, Cadet, showed more discipline than the rest of us combined today." And she sat a little taller, though her hands shook. The inspector announced the real test that had been hidden in the day, a sudden safety drill, peer-led, no instructors, evaluated by hidden cameras and by one silent janitor who was not a janitor, and she explained that scholarships and placements would follow the results. A low murmur pulsed through the crowd, and the colonel said as John said, "Then we finish it right now."
And the clouds parted just enough to send thin sun across the wet sand. The final drill ran under the old man's eye. He said little, he watched much. The 5 boys worked like men who had been given one last rope across a canyon, correcting each other, slowing down, offering a hand to those who needed it. The girl took charge of her lane not by shouting, but by modeling. Every step crisp, every check clear. And when a younger cadet started to cry because he feared he had failed earlier, she handed him her water and said, "Breathe, you're good." And the old man saw that as clearly as he had seen the flare. When it was over, the woman inspector read the scores and said the girl had placed first overall. Cheers rose from kids who had watched her all year and now had a reason to show it. Then the inspector said the 5 boys would not be dismissed, but would be placed on a strict remedial path with weekend duty under the old man's oversight, and there were groans and then breaths of relief, because punishment with a path is a mercy that teaches. And the old man accepted with a slow nod. At the ceremony that evening, the colonel stood on the steps of the hall and began to speak about honor and humility, but he stopped in the middle and did something better. He turned toward the old man, brought his hand to his brow, and saluted first. The cadets followed one by one, even the 5, even the boy who had held the plastic gun, and the old man returned the salute with that burned hand, his eyes wet and fierce at once. And then he took off his cap and walked to the girl and placed it in her hands. And she shook her head and tried to give it back, but he closed her fingers around the brim and said, "You'll make your own, but keep this until then." And she nodded because she understood that some gifts are not about cloth, but about weight. Later, when the sun sank and the crowds drifted away, the boy who had pointed the toy waited by the trash can where it had all begun. He held the blue pistol in his hands and stared at it like it was a mirror. And when the old man came by with his bucket, the boy said, "I know who you are now." And the old man smiled a little and answered, "You know who you are now." And the boy set the plastic gun in the bucket himself and said, "Tomorrow I'll earn the respect I wanted to steal." And the old man said, "Good," and started sweeping again, slow and steady, because the floor still needed cleaning, because pride still leaves scraps behind, and because the next day would bring new cadets with new choices, and he would be there to watch them turn toward the right path before they even knew they were looking for it.